administrative secretary positions, the CAS. Done or not done? Was done, right? Then there was the reduction of the number of advisors by 50%. I think it went up by that figure. Then the budget for office of the First Lady and the Deputy Prime Cabinet Secretary, I believe that was done. Remove budget provisions for confidential budget in the Executive Office. That was not done, and that would be the case for all the rest. Reduction of budgets for renovations by 50%. Have you seen the recent updates on the State House? Suspend purchase of new motor vehicles except for security agencies. Your guess is as good as mine on that one. Suspend non-essential travel by state officers. Propose to Parliament a budget cut of 177 billion instead of 346 billion that the 2024 finance bill targeted. It was done initially, but at the close of the year, as I've said, this had gone up again to increase the deficit by almost 1 trillion shillings. Then banning participation of officers from contributions in Harambes. Now there's a different angle to this, I think empowerment or something. So we are not there yet. So looking at the initial commitments to fiscal consolidation, we believe the government has a lot that begs to be done, given that these commitments were supposed to pursue austerity measures, and most of them are not yet achieved. Now, a bigger conversation is even happening at the county level. Counties depend on national government transfers, most of them of upwards of 90% of their resources. 90% of their budget is funded by the national exchequer, the disbursements from the national government. So, but at the close of the 9 months, by the time we are publishing this report, the final report was not out, but at the 9-month mark, which is April of this year, there was only 58% that had been disbursed, with only 3 months to go. So this included 225 billion, but we do not account for the 30 billion that was arrears the previous year. Now, this money that counties don't spend before the close of the year, it is not immediately accessible, even at the opening of the next year. So for instance, you would imagine, because the expenditure was you'll imagine because the expenditure was that the expenditure was 30-40 billion less before the close of the year, that money is immediately accessible at the opening of the next financial year. So you close the year by 30th June and 1st of July, that money is immediately accessible. That is not the case. So what happens is even some money carried forward, counties can only access them in the second quarter. This has also affected operations in the counties, increase in pending bills, increase in the resource gaps, and so compromising service delivery as it should be. Now, looking at the fiscal, are the slides moving on the slide? They are moving from here, so I don't know. So, right, in the interest of time, let me just move forward. First is to say that there's what the government calls the primary fiscal deficit, which is the revenue minus expenditure, and this expenditure does not include interest payments on debt. So that primary fiscal balance, fiscal balance should be around 2% of the GDP. it should be a surplus of 2% of the GDP, but we are currently at -4, which is a deficit of the GDP. So this explosion in debt interest payments and the disproportionate growth in revenue is very crucial because the government has to cut back on non-priority spending if we are going to achieve the primary fiscal deficit, which currently stands at stands at a deficit of 4%, and we need to go up to 2%. Now, this does not stop here. So the reason why we are emphasizing that the government need to look at the expenditure side of the budget is because starting from 2028, the next decade, there will be at least 1 trillion payments on amortization and interest to up to 2036 on maturing Eurobonds. So these are the highest. The highest is 1 trillion between 2028 and 2036. But in between, there are also very significant payments that need to be made by the government. So if you're paying 1 trillion every year, and in a good case scenario, say for instance this year, which has been I think one of the highest revenue collection of about 2.4 trillion in ordinary revenue, then it means that for every shilling collected, we are going to spend relatively above 60% of that in repayment of debt. And if you look at what comes ahead of that is the aggressive domestic borrowing. The private sector is being crowded out. Over the last couple of months, the CBK has reduced the interest rates, but the amount of the rate of interest on private loans is still sticky. It is not going down. Why? Because the government is a more attractive borrower from the banks. And the domestic debt has been very, very extremely aggressive. Because it has high yields, the premiums are good, the government is more secure. So there is no incentive for the banks, the private banks, to lend to the private sector. Compounding that problem is the pending bills. There was a declaration to clear pending bills, all that had been approved. And what we are seeing is, between last year, 2024, and this year, 2025, the pending bills have increased from 639 billion to 684 billion. This is forced lending by the private sector from the government. The amount at the county level has increased by around 20 billion, and at the national level has increased by more than 70 billion. So why do banks prefer to lend to the government, more than the private sector? I wish you would be seeing this. You would see the growth in credit to the government has been increasing in the last 6 months, from October 2024 up to around March 2025 when we are monitoring this. Comparatively, the credit to the private sector has been going down. In the same period, it's reduced significantly, meaning it's obvious that the government is a more preferable lender than the private sector. So that's why the economic growth has been so sticky, because the private sector operations have minimized. There's money owed to the private sector by the government in terms of pending bills, and most of those small and medium enterprises are no longer in operation because they are unable to sustain this kind of economic or the other business environment. Finally, on SHA and SHIF and its implementation in 2025. First is what we saw a few months ago, that similar to the problems that faced NHIF, there's still major governance and accountability issues in the way remittances are made to health facilities. There are delayed payments because, as you know, the report that was published in May showed that 75% of level 3 to level 5 facilities are the only one that received shift payments. And from that figure, 83% of them received less than half of what they are owed. So this has been affecting the operations of facilities and then also compromising the delivery of health services. If you look also at the registration of SHIF, it has about 22 million registered members, but only 4 million are contributing. Those are the people who are formally employed. So the health system of this country is running on the back of 4 million people. I don't think that's the best way to deliver universal health coverage. We are currently doing about 50% of what is required as a per capita investment on every individual to achieve universal health coverage. The method of means testing that was rolled out by SHA has also been having very many inaccuracies, in determining contributions for the informal sector. And this has been a major complaint as we have had. There has been a very prolonged strike by the UHC health workers who are supposed to be absorbed by the county governments, and some budget allocation was made towards that to ensure that counties absorb these health workers. So what are we saying in conclusion? First is that the macro fiscal analysis that we've done reveals a widening gap between the stated policy intentions and the actual implementation. I think if for nothing else, if you forget everything else about SHA, this is what the major takeaway is. The policy intentions are there, but there is a bigger gap in implementing and executing them. So what does the government need to do? There are a number of things we submit here, and the panel will discuss them in greater detail. One of them is to implement predictable reforms. In this sense, we mean if the government commits to, say, clearing all pending bills, as a private business person, I should be confident that the government will pursue that, and it will honor its obligation to clear any pending bills. If we say that the fiscal deficit will be 4% of the GDP, the expectations of households that need to plan or private sector that need to invest is that they will not outcompete them in borrowing from banks, the domestic commercial banks. Then also anchor fiscal decisions in public participation. This has been more so in the system, the different system, the procurement system, the SHA systems. There are always a new system every day in the government procurement systems that has been challenged, that it has not undergone public participation. The biggest one is the one in the SHA system. Also, the other thing is accelerating pending bills clearance and safeguarding health sector investment to make sure that we protect the vulnerable. Finally, is the reduction on over-reliance on consumption taxes, the VATs and the like. So in most progressive countries, they invest more on income-oriented taxes, But in income-oriented taxes, this is where we have the huge tax expenditure in our country. We are foregoing revenue of upwards of 400 billion every year, on the pretext that we are going to spur economic growth, we are going to create more jobs, but we need to evaluate these tax expenditures against the policy objectives that they're supposed to pursue. In doing that, maybe we'll be able to bridge the fiscal gap, but that in itself cannot be sufficient. I will invite our panelists to reflect on these issues because I don't have enough time to go deeper. but they'll speak about them as we proceed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, our country lead, Daniel Rangu, for triggering the buttons for us and triggering those light bulb moments so that we now get into the flesh and hear perspectives from our esteemed panelists on the reflections, on the findings, and most importantly to ask ourselves, what do we need to do? In policy conversations, one very important thing that we need to always carry forward is that the policy insights, the conversations that we raise should be irritable, so irritable that we cannot ignore them. We need to have credible arguments on what policy actions and reforms we need to make. So credible and very solid and backed by citizens' voices, backed by evidence, backed by thought-out analysis, so that as we advance these reforms, then we are able to see substantive change. I will welcome my colleague, Veronica Ndegwa, who will take us through the panel discussion. Good morning.
This is working. As introduced, my name is Veronica Ndegwa. If you can get a different one, it's actually on. Can someone confirm it's working at the back?
Okay.
Yes. From the mic?
Yeah.
Oh. Probably I have big lungs, like Moses had. So I'll be moderating today's panel and just reflecting on the presentation that has been made. At IPF, we usually say our mission is to see all values of public principles of public finance are realized. But I think if what you've seen from the presentation is to continue, then IPF will be around for a very long while. The presentation has cast light on some of the challenges that we are facing as a country. We've seen that our growth numbers have been revised downwards. The fiscal deficit keeps widening because of revenue shortfalls and ever-growing public expenditures. The Kenya's debt to GDP ratio is above its anchor of 55% in net present value terms. And as even the debt grows, we have large payments scheduled on Eurobonds and other debt, including domestic debt that keeps growing. In terms of our policy framework, we see great persistent non-compliance with Article 223 in passing supplementary budgets, and there are concerns around debt sustainability because of our increased borrowing. And this, as highlighted by Daniel, risks crowding out the private sector, and from the growth numbers in terms of credit extended to the private sector, there is much higher growth in terms of lending to the government and a decline in credit to the private sector. As IPF, we try as much as possible to give policy alternatives to what the government is proposing, and this is what I hope my panel will do today. Mine is to ask the questions. I hope they are not hard. And my first panelist is our former PS at the National Treasury, Dr. Julius Muya, FCS. He has a very good and lengthy profile. I'll try to go through it quickly. FCS, FCPA, Dr. Julius Muya, CBS, is currently the public sector lead at Anderson, a consulting and tax advisory firm. His area of specialization is finance and public policy. Prior to joining Anderson in 2023, Dr. Muya served as the Principal Secretary at the National Treasury of Kenya where he was responsible for coordinating and budgeting function, macroeconomic policy, mobilizing grant and debt finance, among others. This role also involved providing leadership in climate finance, as well as conceptualizing and implementing innovative reforms in policy, institutional, regulatory, and legal space. Dr. Muya has therefore extensive experience in public policy and economic planning. He is a regular speaker on various topics and subjects, and that's why we invited him here today. Dr. Julius Muya, kindly join us on stage. My colleague, Mesha, will guide you where to sit. I think you should sit on where the cameras are focusing more. The second panelist is Andrew. Andrew Kubo is a seasoned public finance expert with over 15 years of leadership in Kenya's public sector, specializing in public financial management, fiscal policy, and budget reforms to drive accountability and revenue growth. He is an FCCA and CPAK certified professional. He has spearheaded transformative initiatives, including serving as the county executive for finance in Taita Taveta. He is currently a PhD candidate with a focus on tax justice and climate responsive budgeting. Andrew, please she did not introduce herself, but I have her profile here. Ms. Ruth Kendagor is the third panelist. She's an economist and a public finance expert with a passion for good governance and policy leadership. She champions fiscal transparency, prudent debt management, and revenue reforms that works to build partnerships that drive co-created, evidence-based policy solutions in Kenya and beyond. Ms. Ruth Kendagor is the Director, Global Partnerships at IPF. Welcome, Ruth. I also need to be directed on where to sit. Thank you, Mesha. And we can have mics for the panelists. All right. Our first question goes to Dr. Julius Muya. And I think, given the presentation, we've seen that major institutions are revising our growth downwards. So probably given your expertise in this space, you can tell us what is your view on Kenya's macro-fiscal outlook and what are some of the policy actions that could restore confidence in the economy for sustained growth.
Thank you, for that question. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Let me respond to what has been presented to me, and really do appreciate first IPF for organizing this session. And also do appreciate Daniel for that very good presentation, although we missed on a few of the slides. So maybe when we get a chance to look at some of the slides, we will be able to interact with the subject better. But dealing with the questions that have been raised to me, one about what is our prospects as a country in terms of GDP growth, given the projections. And normally when you look at the various institutions that do their focus on GDP growth, there's usually some very close convergence, but not complete agreement in terms of 100% agreement. So 4.5, 4.8, 4.7%. I would say the projections are fairly credible in terms of where we are likely to see the economy going. And if you look at the past, and those of us who are academicians, and I want to appreciate you here, you can even look back, maybe 10, 15 years ago. Every year or every quarter of the year, we do this kind of like projections from various institutions. So how far do those projections go in terms of now being indicated by reality. And unless something happens which is very, very unexpected, usually the projections are not very far from the reality. So I see the economy growing more or less in the same region, 4.5, 4.8% has been projected. And I say so because one of the fortunate things that we have in Kenya is that we have very credible data from our KPS institution in terms of what is used to generate those projections, to generate those numbers in terms of where the economy is likely to head. Also, our economy is quite diversified. Unlike some economies where they rely on maybe one or two commodities, in which case a small change in a fundamental aspect, either sector or some world event, usually causes a big problem, a big swing in the GDP growth. In our case in Kenya, because of the diversification of the economy, we don't have that big risk of the economy kind of like growth shifting because of just one factor changing. Obviously, we rely a lot on rainfall, rain-fed agriculture, but to the extent that the rains have been sympathetic to us, I see that is a good anchor in terms of saying the economy will grow in the region that has been presented. So my conclusion on that is that we are safe with that assumption of 4.5, 4.8%, unless something really drastic happens, like COVID happened. Who knew COVID would happen? So we pray that nothing as tragic and as devastating as COVID happens. Now, you did ask me about some policy reforms that can restore confidence in the public on the economy and the government in terms of how we are doing. Of course, there are very many, but let me just pick a few. And one of them, and I was making notes as Stanley was making the presentation. So one of them that I picked very quickly is the issue of our public health. And there are a lot of nomenclatures, a lot of words that you can use to address that issue. So when I was in the public sector, we used to talk about fiscal consolidation, and it's still the case. Fiscal consolidation, where you reduce the budget deficit very proactively, and also reduce the accumulation of debt. But also you go ahead and address something called liability management, where you're looking at the maturity profile of the debt that you have, you're looking at the cost of the debt, and you are looking at how the repayments on the debt will be made, and what is the risk which is underlying in the debt. So if we can very, very proactively focus on fiscal consolidation so that it is not just a pronunciation of a number, that sometimes then we look for reasons why we did not achieve it. If we can proactively deal with liability management in terms of the maturity profile of our debt, in terms of the cost of servicing our debt, in terms of risk of our debt, that can help a lot. And that can reduce the crowding out of the private sector, where money comes out of the banks and is given to government through treasury bills and bonds, so that government can then finance its budget. So that's the one recommendation that I would make in terms of policy action. Now the second one that I would recommend would be looking at the issue of just budgeting as well. Because the way Daniel did present the numbers here, it was very clear that budgets of government and government expenditure has a sticky behavior. You know, you have numbers that are thrown in there, and getting them out is very difficult. If you look at the austerity measures here, I did a quick count. There were about 10 lines of austerity measures. Can you remember how many of those 10 lines were achieved? There were 2. So in our simple maths, what is the achievement rate? 2 divided by 10. 20%, right? Because government expenditure tends to be sticky. something that you've always budgeted for before, you keep on budgeting for it, even when the reason for that budget has disappeared. So I would say focusing on capital expenditure, focusing on revenue expenditure, and by the way, and I want to say this because I have the mic, the electronic government procurement system, EGP, is one very tried and tested method and tool that has been used globally to deal with controlling government expenditure for what we call common user items, both goods, services, and public works. It is something that is tried and tested and that can help reduce the government expenditure. The third item that I would mention very quickly, it is something that Daniel also mentioned, and I took note of that. And he did indicate that there is a gap between the policy intention and what then tends to happen. And that is the animal, which I would call the area of how government delivers what it intends to deliver in terms of policy, and how government delivers projects. And that is the area of monitoring and evaluation. Very, very clear monitoring and evaluation to test and make sure that you've got indicators before any policy has been pronounced. You've got indicators for any project so that we can do a proper monitoring and evaluation. And I think that's an area where we can benefit a lot if there's a big policy reform around that area. There are many others that I can say, but for the time being, let me stay with those. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing these ones, and I think we are taking a few recommendations that will also inform our analysis going forward. We'll come to Ruth, again sticking to the issue of projections, but this time around turning to revenue projections. And in financial year 2024-2025, we saw the government revise revenue targets at least 3 times and still missed the revenue targets. And yet we have seen some revenue reforms come into place since the government, the current government came into office. So could you tell us where the government is going wrong in its fiscal projections and its tax policy reforms? And when responding to that, probably also give a few recommendations.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Indeed, as Dr. Muya has mentioned, the credibility of the systems that we leverage on to inform public policy and policy decisions has been stable, yes, but there is room to improve further. Now, specifically with regard to revenue projection, within the financial year 2024-2025, the year that ended in June 30th this year, we saw the revenue projections being revised up until the point of supplementary 93 at the end of financial year, moving from a target of 2.9 to 2.4 trillion. But if you look back in the past, in the previous years, missing the revenue targets is not something new. It's not something that we can credit or say this was a particular instance or an outlier within the financial year 2024-2025. Over the past almost 10 years, our budgeting system and our financial planning has always shown that we have missed our targets. And notably, the gap between the target and the actual has been growing. Revenue generation and revenue collection has been growing, yes, but the gap between the target and the actual has also been growing. Around 2012, our revenue gap, or the gap between the target and the actual, was around 30, 40, 50 billion. Now we are looking at something 70, 80, close to 100. So it is more than just the shocks that came with the citizen uprise and the rejection of the Finance Bill 2024. There is more, a bigger and a deeper systematic issue that needs to be addressed. Why are we seeing this shortfall? Number one, our assumptions when we're making revenue projections have not always materialized. So government needs to look back at the assumptions, at the projections, the fundamentals that inform the projections that are being made so that they're realistic. One of the things PS Muya has mentioned is the growth in the private sector. We have always put quite some emphasis on the private sector growth that will then relate or realize into revenue collection, but that has not been the case. Secondly, the frequent changes in tax rules contributes to uncertainty that is not harmful to the economy. And this has been discussed in several platforms. Last year, we had the medium-term revenue strategy coming into place. The intention of the MTRS was to provide that predictability, that stability in terms of revenue reforms, so that business people, citizens, investors can have an outlook, a 3 to 5 year outlook on what to expect in terms of revenue reforms, and therefore create some sense of stability and predictability. But what we have seen is that the revenue targets, so the actual implementation of the revenue strategy has not really been followed to the letter, and so the concerns of uncertainty and lack of predictability still holds. And thirdly, as a response to that also, is the issue of revenue leakages. Our projections may have some credibility, but the leakages in the system still exist. Leakages starting from tax exemptions. At the current system, our tax exemptions are about 500 billion, which is a significant amount. Literally, that is double what we spend on the health sector, providing health coverage for our country, Kenya. So we need to look at these revenue leakages, so that as we are making exemptions, then we ensure that we are making revenue projections for what we want to collect, but also sealing the loopholes that lead to seepages or leakages of the revenue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth. Predictable tax environment, as well as addressing the problem of tax expenditure. So coming to you, Andrew, sticking to the question of reforms. And this question was targeted at you intentionally. And I think over the past few years, we have seen citizens being more informed, both on the kind of budgeting the government is doing and as well as the tax reforms. And as Ruth mentioned, the 2024 protests around the finance bill was a good example of an informed citizenry. So the question is, how can the government better design its reforms to balance Kenya's fiscal needs, because we do have fiscal needs, including debt service, and while also being acceptable to the citizenry?
Thank you. You've brought me back to the issue of, say, the Gen Z protest, and I think it came at the right time. Why do I say so? It's because it put the government on the spot that something is not working. Can you listen to us as citizens? So what does that tell us? We have a citizenry that is well knowledgeable. You'll be surprised, most of the people who are active in terms of demanding more, in terms of the government policies, are people who are just coming from college, university. These are people who have gone through the free education system that was there. So you find they have the knowledge. Then two, we cannot run away from the fact that we live in a technological era where information is available at the palm of your hands, just by your phone. You can do a short analysis of what is happening. So once government understands that, then now we start coining and framing our policies towards that. Now, first and foremost, for me, I think having looked at it, I would suggest, or I would tell the government that it is now mandatory for us to embed public participation, or if we may put it that way, public participation in budget formulation and tax policies. That one needs to happen now. I know we have a bill in Parliament concerning issues to do with public participation. I'm not so sure whether it is an act, hopefully, because it would have laid down a framework of how the citizens are involved. So what you may call public participation is not public participation. I can comprehend what is, say, in a tax, in a finance act bill, or even the budget. I can understand it, but who caters for the Mwananchi back in my rural area, say in the far-flung area like Turkana. So how are we bringing them on board? See, so the government now needs to look at that. How are we going to communicate our policies to our citizens? That is number one. They have to do that. So they have to find a way. And in doing that, they also have to bring in the element of technology. ICT ministry now has, for me, I look at it as an open forum for them to use all available forms of media, social media, and what have you, to communicate. That's how you bring in the citizens so that they can own some of these things. Then number two, even as we look at how we're going to engage the citizens, let's also talk about having progressive tax policies. I think my panelists here have talked about it. We need to know. You see, it is very strange when you wake up prior to 2024. We woke up and then we're told now there's a housing levy that will be charged. That was not in your budget. You know, when I wake up, I go to work, I know at the end of the month I expect to receive this. Then all of a sudden you're hit with the housing levy. All of a sudden you're hit with CHA. All of a sudden, so all these changes bring uncertainty, and this uncertainty now rattles the public. So let's have a tax policy that is, predictable, something that we can sit down and say, okay, why don't we monitor it for the next 2-3 years? What has been the shortfall? How do we now look at, say, the leakages? Something that we can comprehend, understand, and we can follow through. If we get that, then I think the government now will be doing it well. Then the third thing, communication. I cannot stress that more than enough. The government is not communicating with the citizen. Unfortunately, that is what is happening. That's why, as someone who really did analysis of the Finance Act 2024, there were a lot of good things in it. How did the government communicate? They failed to communicate. So, as someone who probably is looking at housing levy, I would wake up and shout and say, no, this one, no. But you see, the government needs to adopt a much more citizen-centered communication where we communicate openly and tell them, you know what, why we're bringing this is because we want to achieve 1, 2, 3. This tax we're collecting, how are we spending the tax? Let's have open forums whereby we have candid and open discussions. And once we do that, then I do believe that even bringing in new policies or coming up with new frameworks for the government, it will be very easy for them because they have communicated, they have taken in the citizens' perceptions about it. It's more or less of an interaction. But until then, I don't know. Maybe we'll experience more of these unsettled citizens and what. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Effective public participation anchored on effective communication. So coming back to you, Dr. Mbuya, you spoke about liability management, and this is in the context of managing our public debt better. My question is, should debt restructuring be part of the conversation around liability management? And secondly, we've seen the government shifting. I called it creative, quote-unquote, borrowing approaches, such as securitization. In responding to that question, you can tell us what securitization is and the fiscal risks that it presents.
Thank you, Veronica. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Oh, lovely, thank you. A second.
No, the mic, change the mic.
This one I give away. Okay, this is better. So going back to the first question, and I think the big question is not just about liability management. What I was reading as Veronica was going through the question, by the way, how much time do I have? I have 3 minutes to convince you. So this is a big subject actually, which can take me quite a while. But let me try to rush through in the 3 minutes that I And so I think the elephant in the room is restructuring. I think that's a question I've been asked. In terms of the implications, when you talk about restructuring, it is something that you only do when you are unable to service your debt, as is the case in the public sector. Now, that is something that is not very, very well. And countries that submit themselves to restructuring would be countries in debt distress, not with high risk of debt distress, like is the case for Kenya. And restructuring can take very, very many forms, postponing the payment of debt as it comes due, changing the interest rates, haircuts, yeah, thank you very much, Mheshimiwa, haircuts, and also could be reorganizing the maturity profile, I said about delaying payments, and so on and so forth. So it is something that you don't just rush into it. But there's a better way of dealing with public debt other than submitting yourself to restructuring. And it is the situation and the right nomenclature, and thank you, Veronica, for using that word, is liability management. And here, you are looking at an active and a proactive stance in terms of looking at the maturity profile of your public debt. You are looking at your cost of debt. You are looking at the repayment program that you have on your debt, and you are looking to make sure that you've got the lowest cost for your debt. You are looking to make sure that your risk of debt, kind of like default on the payment, is minimized as much as possible. But at the same time, that exercise must also be anchored on ensuring that you are providing enough finance for the government to finance its both capital and revenue expenditure. And so I want to say, thankfully, there are a lot of tools that are available for active liability management. And that is something that if a government prioritizes it, there are very good examples of how various governments, and I can quote some examples in Africa, Benin, Seychelles, Senegal, Rwanda. I mean, these are countries that have been involved in very active liability management and have been able to significantly reduce their cost of debt. In fact, I do submit here that when those countries issue Eurobonds, they are able to issue Eurobonds at a lower cost than Kenya. And that is because of very active liability management. So I think on the liability management and the question about restructuring, I have done a bit of justice. Now, the question about securitization, this is a long debate. And looking at it just straight from the word securitization, it relates to either assets or revenues, where an institution has got a pool of assets, and that pool of assets, then you structure them in a way such that you can sell them to investors through what is called an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, which is created so that you transfer those assets to that special purpose vehicle, and it is that special purpose vehicle which manages the assets so that the returns from the assets can be used to pay the investors who have given you the money. So that is on the asset side. And you can think about assets in Kenya that can be put in such a vehicle. But I think what is being asked today here is the securitization of revenues, where you've got future cash flows. Like for instance, I think the best example would be like the road maintenance levy, RML, where you've got a predictable income stream, and you know that in the next so many years, this is how much you'll be collecting in terms of road maintenance levy. And so instead of waiting for those years for the money to come in through the levy, then you organize and package that revenue in a way such that you transfer the revenues and the rights to the revenues to a special purpose vehicle that you create. And so that when the road maintenance levy is collected in future years, instead of it coming to the institution in government that receives it, it goes now to that special purpose vehicle that has been created. Now, if you look at it, there are, okay, the word Veronica has used, innovative, yeah. There is an innovation around it, because you are saying rather than wait until 10 years to get this accumulated revenue from road maintenance levy, let me get the money now and then use it for whatever purpose. But I think that's where the catch is. Once then you get that money up front, what you do with the money? Unafanya nini na hiyo pesa? I think almost everybody understands why. Unafanya nini na hiyo pesa? And I think that's a big question we should ask ourselves. If that money is not used to repay some existing debt, then you then end up in a problem in terms of incurring a fiscal risk. Because that money will not be available in future to do that which it was meant for. Like for instance, if you securitize road maintenance levy, then the collections in the future will not be available to maintain the roads. So where will you get the money to maintain the roads in future? And so that's one of the big questions. The other one is the governance around it. I mean, how do you then make sure that you structure a special purpose vehicle that properly takes the risks on that revenue and make sure that there's transparency in the way the structure has been set up? Because if there is no transparency, the people who will invest in that SPV to give government money, they will ask for a very high return. So it will cost the government a lot more in terms of now the money that they have received upfront than if they used another mechanism. And so there are a lot of things that one has to be very careful when you are getting into a securitization program, because there are those issues about the pricing, transparency, the special purpose vehicle, and the fact that the government does not get the money immediately. The last point I want to say is that usually governments do not give security for what they borrow. I want to repeat that. Usually governments don't give security. When you buy a treasury bill or a treasury bond, you don't ask the government to give you a guarantee, do you? You don't. And also when we do the Eurobonds issues, when we borrow money from banks, government does not give a security. But in securitization, government actually gives a security, because the security is the underlying asset or the revenue streams that you transfer to the SPV. So there's a whole big question. If you've got a market that is functioning perfectly, then the persuasion to use securitization is sometimes a little bit difficult. But that is something that we can discuss more on the issue of market failures and how you deal with market failures. Thank you, Veronica.
So thank you for that response. And as the good book, the Bible says, let them those who have ears hear. But I think my key takeaway is on transparency. I am still looking for a government document explaining what securitization is. Honorable Ndindi Nyoro confirms there is none, and so I think that is one of the areas that we'll be speaking on in his keynote address. Coming back to you, Ruth, given the situation we are facing today, is there still scope for fiscal consolidation, or should we forget about it? And can we still pursue fiscal consolidation and still safeguard our growth?
Thank you very much, Veronica. I think one of the biggest ways and the biggest gaps we have with our fiscal consolidation is on expenditure management. And if we can find the grasp and the grip on controlling our expenditure without compromising development, without compromising social protection, then we will have some progress and we will have light at the end of the tunnel. normally in our financial years and our budgeting, we see that at the beginning of the financial year, there's really some optimism in terms of the budget deficit. There's optimism in terms of proper debt management. But as we get to consecutive revisions of the budget and the supplementary budgets, the numbers widen. Every time there's an increasing number in terms of budget. So we increase the budget, the projected expenditure, we reduce the revenue targets, and so our fiscal deficit continues widening, and we veer off from our fiscal consolidation path. And so one of the best ways for us to progressively work towards fiscal consolidation is to control our spending and enforce expenditure discipline. The second issue, and I will not repeat in detail, is what former PS has mentioned, Dr. Muya, about liability management. If we are able to properly implement liability management, and we look forward to a detailed session where we speak about liability management, and I hope we will have Dr. Muya with us again to share insights, I think we will nail it. Because we spend a significant part of our revenues paying off debt, on debt service. Revenue that would have then been spent on essential expenditure, so that we are able to then reduce the non-essentials. So that is another critical area that we need to work on. And last but not least, there is progressive space for us to continue looking at our revenue mobilization efforts, so that as we reduce expenditure, we are also increasing revenue progressively, so that the gap is then reduced. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Ruth. And I think us better managing our expenditures remains key, because that's where the bigger problem is. So coming back to you, Andrew, I think one of the questions, or one of the things that usually come up a lot is around governance. And my question is, to what extent are our fiscal challenges as a result of gaps in our governance?
Right. Let's face it, before I get into it, let's be honest to ourselves as Kenyans. Politics and economics in this country go hand in hand. Mheshimiwa here will tell us politics is about interests, and interests emanate from the economy. So let's agree, first of all, that is a problem in itself, because as long as we cannot separate the two, then we'll definitely have issues with how we handle governance. And why do I say that? Look at the challenges we're facing right now. Our fiscal space is shrinking. Why is it always shrinking? Why are we talking about revenue shortfall? Why are we talking about, matters to do with corruption? Why are we talking about non-compliance with Article 223 on supplementary budget? All these issues are mirrored in issues to do with governance. So ideally, yes, we do have an issue with how we govern or we run the government. And basically I look at it in terms of, are we complying with the laws that we have enacted ourselves? Are we? So that is where the problem starts. It's about governance. You have the laws, you're not following the laws. If it is about borrowing, to what threshold? Are we as a nation able to borrow over and above our current level where we are? No, those are some of the questions we need to ask. Why can't we make a budget that mirrors the revenues we collect? Why can't we live within our means? Daniel projected the austerity measures. Out of 10, only 2%, 20%, if I may put it that way. We are in compliance with 20. So what does that tell us? It tells us that we have a systematic problem with governance and how we govern this country and how we sort of implement those laws. So for me, I think if we are to get out of this particular situation, let's strengthen some of these institutions. You know, when we did the Constitution 2010, it came with so many bodies that are here to help us govern this country. The Office of the Auditor General, very key. But when we look at those reports, who listens to them? who really pays attention to what is being said. The Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, vital in trying to, for lack of a better word, whip us to comply with the laws that we've done. But who's talking about that? Why do we have the PFM Act? Because it clearly states on matters you were discussing about pending bills, and it clearly states first charge should be those pending bills. They are not being paid. Why? So it's just a matter of compliance, and compliance I related to governance. So it's very simple. We have everything. It's for us to comply. And once we start complying with some of the laws that we as a nation created and formulated and say this is how we want to govern our country, we want to govern our counties, then we have it. So until then, we'll still have the problem of economics and politics. So I'll finish it off and say it also matters, do we have the political goodwill? If we get the political goodwill, then some of these things will work. But as long as we do not have the political goodwill, then the effects will be seen on the economic side of this country. Thank you.
Thank you for that comprehensive response. And for those of us who are students of economics, the first thing we are introduced to is The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, and it was an essay on political economy. Probably there's a reason why in those olden days, politics and economics were one, right? So with that, I think I'll pass it to the audience. Because of time, I would restrict it to 2 questions or 3 questions and indicate the panelists would like to respond. And I would request the media to hold on their questions for one-on-one session with the panelists or any other person within the room. So for the rest of the audience, if you have a burning question and to whom you'd want to direct it to. The first 3 hands, I see one. Unfortunately, the media is...
Some space, please.
Yeah.
We have 2 here, Veronica.
I'm taking 3 and not from the media.
No, it's not media.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, which and which?
There's a gentleman here.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
There are 2 ladies here. Okay, we can take the 4 hands. I think I saw 4 hands. We are starting with Ms. Janet. Keep it short so that we're able to take the 4 instead of 3. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Veronica, and thank you, our panelists, and also the Rango's presentation. But I thought today, in today's meeting, we should have broken it a little further. Like Ruth, when you say expenditure management, for this forum, it's good to say what that literally means. Because we are in an economy where businesses have shut down, we're in an economy where people have stopped going to school, we're in a place where the situation is dire. I feel that in the panelists, if we can go a little further and really speak through the actual situations, and even in the analysis and the report, what are the implications of the policy reforms that are performing or not performing, so that then it informs the citizen what is the actual situation on the midterm diagnostics. Thank you.
So good morning, panelists. Thank you very much for that very informative session. My name is Mudani Gashire. I work at the Kenya School of Government. Listening to this, it's very, let me say, depressing. I'm a lawyer, and bottom line, it's an issue of lack of coherence to constitutionalism. And looking back, 15 years since we enacted a constitution, the idea behind this constitution was to ensure that those in leadership are able to be good stewards of our financial management. And all these policies we are talking about are already in our books. And the question I have is, how do we make constitutionalism work? That beyond whoever is the leader, that we can ensure that this is done. And leadership does not become an avenue for self-greed, self-whatever, because this seems to be the issue. And that's why we enacted this constitution. And so I'm just wondering, how do we make this work? Because it needs to work. Today, there are thousands of families who cannot feed themselves. Today, there are thousands of families, children are not able to go to school. Today, families are going bankrupt because they are trying to get their loved ones to hospitals. Yet, we have leaders as stewards. And I'm left wondering, how do we make stewardship be implemented? It's not an if or when, it is supposed to be done. So I probably think none of us can answer that, but I think we need to go through this because this is the issue. It is not all these policies, it is the issue of non-compliance to a constitution. Thank you.
Thank you. The next one, 30 seconds.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anthony, and I work in the banking industry from UBA. So I think mine is very simple. Let me make it simple, but it's a bit complicated. So the first one is, it's normal for any household. As I grow my budget, I will definitely grow my expenses. When my expenses this year were 20, next year I want my expenses to be 30 or 40 or 50. I know Mheshimiwa is here. Which reforms are there in Parliament that make us look at the expenditure side? Because you see, we have a norm whereby every year the budget is going up. We're talking about revenue reduction. But I can't see any reform that is set up to talk about expenditure reduction. I think that's the biggest problem. The second question I'd like to ask is, who said we must have a finance bill every year? No, it's nowhere in the Constitution. Let me be honest. Who said tax has to be changed every year? You know, those are the questions that I'd like to be answered.
Thank you very much. The final one. Hi. This turn.
Good morning. My name is Shailene Mungomula, a boot camper at the Institute of Public Finance, and a very passionate young Kenyan, may I add. I can't help to wonder, is it about time that as a nation we come to the conclusion that perhaps the devolution of power isn't necessarily meeting our expectations and rather becoming an economic hindrance? According to the data that Daniel gave us, he said that our devolved units are majorly reliant on the government for 90% of their budgets, which translates into recurrent expenditure. So does that mean that now we can sit down and say that perhaps if we reduce the devolved units in our country, that will translate into us no longer missing our revenue targets, and as well as bettering the service delivery in our country and also creating a larger growth margins in our economy? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Shailene. I think because of time, we'll take those ones. My panelists, kindly respond to the question you're comfortable with. We'll start with Ruth, and while at it, also give your closing remarks, your parting shot. In 1 minute, kindly.
Thank you very much, Veronica. You know, one of the essence and the main reason why we have these sessions is to create that demand for these conversations. And I'm really happy listening at the questions that are coming in saying that this is not enough. We need to deepen this, widen this, and probably make it even more frequently and more visible and, you know, more useful in the conversation. So maybe I'll speak into the part on expenditure management, and I'll give 2 examples on what we can do in terms of expenditure management. Number 1, prioritization. Let us look at our spending. It is okay for us to spend on everything that we need, on schools, on renovations, on ICT and everything. But are they all a priority? Our colleague and friend today from the banking industry has mentioned that even in your households, you work with a budget. And in our households, we prioritize. You will put food on the table, pay rent, pay school fees, before you think about extra clothes. You will reduce on certain items because other things take priority. Is it possible for us to do that as a government, as a country? Yes, it is. Secondly, wasteful spending. And when I say wasteful spending, it's not just wasteful in terms of things that are not necessary, but even items that are necessary but are not working. Let me explain what I mean. If you have a moment after this event, go to the IPF website, look for an analysis called the Annual National Shadow Budget. In the shadow budget, we analyze government budgets, past performance, as well as analyze or critique the credibility of the projections for the coming year. One of the things that we have raised consistently is that in our budget spending, we execute our budgets as allocated. The monies are allocated and spent very well, or at least spent to almost 100%. But the non-financial indicators, the targets that were set alongside those resources are not met. If you are given money today to educate 1,000 children, and you spend 99% of that money, but you only educate 600 children, where did the resources that was meant for the other 400, where were they spent on? Can they be sent back to the kitty? Or can there be a proper explanation as to why these resources were not used? Those are some of the issues that we hope progressively Parliament will pick up, so that we are able to interact, and we have institutions that give us this information. We have the publications by IPF. We have the Controller of Budget that publishes budget expenditure reports. We have the Auditor General who gives the analysis of what is happening with our resources. One of the key issues before Parliament to pick this up and institutionalize these discussions, so that before new budgets are allocated, before new resources are allocated, then we are able to look at past expenditure and use that to make informed decisions. Thank you.
All right. If you'll allow me, I heard about devolution and finance bill every year. Let me respond to those two. Now, do we really need a finance bill every year that does all those amendments to the rates and what have you? It has come at the right time, this question, because currently I'm working on a paper on really, is it working? These continuous amendments, yearly amendments. And I've not finalized it, but you can see when you look at the data you have, really there's no much we gain from it, to be quite honest. And Mheshimiwa will bear me witness in this. So it is not about the finance bill. It is not about the erratic amendment of those rates and what have you. It is how are we implementing that particular document. We might have a finance bill, probably for me, and one of my recommendations would be, let's have a tax policy that tells us in the next 5 years, this is what we should be having. You know, once we have that, then how do we now pull in everyone into the tax bases so that, you know, the landlords here, they are paying the tax and what have you. So it is more of enforcement now rather than every year coming up with a finance bill. For me, I think that would be the way to go. Let's have a tax policy. Let's look at how are we implementing it, the enforcement part of it. We've talked about devolution and economic hindrance. I was privileged to be the pioneers who started the county governments. And I'll be very frank on this platform that Kenya was never ready for 47 county governments, unfortunately. Let's just be honest. And just look at it, you know. I've been there, we've had economic regional blocks. Why are we having such discussions? Because we're trying to pull in or rope in economies of scale as counties. What does that tell us? Did we have a problem with the 8 provinces we had, we should have done 14. They would work better because now you're pulling in the resources you have and doing one thing. Say a county right now is struggling with one project that if it pulls resources with the 2 other of its neighbors, they would do a mega project and it would benefit all those people. But you see now we're subdividing and subdividing. So for me, I think I'm sort of in agreement with you. 47, I think we need to start asking ourselves this question. Do we really need 47? And to be quite honest, the answer is no. Let's talk of 14. Closing remarks, I think IPF, I need to give you credit for this. These platforms, I look at this fora and platform as incubancy to policy. And I'm glad we have even Mushimi here. So let's have these gatherings, let's have these cities, and IPF and other think tanks. This is what we need. Let us, because from here we'll be shaping policy in this country. From here we'll be shaping how we want governance to be done or conducted in this country. So my gratitude to IPF for this particular sitting, and we hope there'll be more, whereby we'll be challenging policy and recommending policy. Thank you.
Dr. Mira, in 1 minute, I know I'm a bit unfair to you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, my colleagues have done justice to some of the comments that I would have made. But let me jump straight to what Modoni you said about constitutionalism, and we are failing to reap the fruits of constitutionalism, and this constitutionalism not working. And so I had some still in the national economic and social. Right, yeah. So in my past life, I was the CEO of the National Economic and Social Council, which was responsible for coordinating the formulation of Vision 2030. And that was in the year of our Lord 2008 when it was launched. And one of the things that was very, very clear to us was that in addition to constitutionalism and the laws that support the constitution, including regulations and whatever government issues, you need to address something called national values. And that informed Article 10 of the Constitution, where we talked about national values and principles of governance. That also informed Article 132. So my brothers and sisters, I want to persuade us that one of the things that we haven't done good justice is to progress that national values and principles of governance. I know we have set up institutions which have the mandate of promoting the national values and principles of governance, but I would submit here if IPF can also look at a way of monitoring and evaluating to what extent we have implemented Article 10 and Article 132. That can provide a basis of us making sure that the things that government says it's going to do are done. Because behavior has a lot to do with your values. I can talk a lot. But let me just say the last thing about Anthony and the expenditure and the issues that are surrounding it. I think there's a lot that we can talk about how government should and can ensure that it controls public expenditure. I had touched on it earlier on, and I would also say another session with IPF, we can actually just zero in on this, because this to me is a big thing. You know, making sure that you've got value for money for government projects, you've got value for money for government procurement of goods, services, and common user items. Just make sure that you don't have parallel and duplicate projects that are being implemented. There's a lot that we can do to manage government expenditure. But there is the question of all the interested parties who are on the table when we are doing this government budgeting. Just to make sure that we rein them in and we say, this is the cap. I mean, you can't go about this. It is possible. Some countries have done it. I mean, and we are not lesser mortals. We can do it. I want to thank IPF for inviting me to make this comment. I could have spoken a lot, but there's always another time. Thank you, and God bless us all.
All right, thank you very much, and I think I do not have anything else to add, but as Daniel said, the intention is there, the gap remains in implementation. That has been our time. I had 45 minutes and I can't believe we're already over time by 7 minutes. Apologies for that. Let's appreciate my panelists. Thank you very much. I hand it back to Ruth.
Well, thank you very much to our panelists. They have compensated while the mic was failing me. I hope you have enjoyed the chat. I want to take this opportunity now to invite our CEO, James Moragori at the Institute of Public Finance, to just say a word and then invite the keynote speaker of the day. Excellent. Right. So are you all set? So James, you have a raised platform. Hoping that you punch higher as you invite the keynote speaker.
Thank you very much, everyone, and good morning. I have a very simple task. First of all, to say thank you to my team at IPF and to thank our panelists for such an engaging conversations. But I have, as part of this summary, based on what we've had, okay, the media is telling me, are we good?